Good afternoon. My name is Brad Cheeves. I'm Vice President for Development and External Affairs. In just a moment, President Turner will make a statement, and Rick Hart will follow with a statement. And then at the conclusion of Mr. Hart's statement, we'll go to Brad Townsend for the first question. We ask that you have one question, one follow-up. We'll go to the next one, and then if we have to do another round, we'll do that. So, with that, President Turner.
Thank you, Brad. Well, we've had some great days on campus lately and celebrated many good things, but this is obviously a disappointing day for the SMU family. But it's hard on everybody that loves SMU and involved with our intercollegiate athletic programs or simply the entire university effort. I don't intend to review the NCAA report simply because it's been out and I'm sure you've all had a chance to read it, the press release, as well as many of you I know have read the entire report. But I do want to share a few thoughts before we get underway. First, I believe that SMU has a very strong compliance program. We have had it audited externally. We have changed and added to our enforcement and compliance activities. And I think in terms of how compliance programs are structured in the United States, that ours is certainly one of the strong ones and is identified as being so. As this particular case certainly underlines, however, individuals, if they choose to violate rules, can choose to do so. And this is a situation in which several note that they knew what the rules were and they chose to go in another direction. We as an institution have to accept responsibility for all violations, whether or not they're done by ignorance or done by intention, and move to make sure that we can learn as much as we can from this experience as we go forward. There are a number of the findings that deeply disturb us relative to the penalties that are placed on our student athletes, and we'll be reviewing whether or not to appeal these over the next 15 days, which fits with the NCAA policy. Most of our student athletes had no involvement whatsoever with any of the issues that resulted in violations. And so as a result, we're very troubled about their lack of opportunity for postseason play, either on a team or as an individual. There are a number of these things that we'll be looking at in the coming days, but we want everybody associated with SMU to understand that we are committed to excellence. We're committed to being in compliance with NCAA standards. When that doesn't occur, we'll act swiftly to address it, as we have in this case, and then we want to move forward. It's important for us to evaluate the situation, decide what's best for the institution and its programs, and then move forward. Throughout this process, Rick Hart and his staff, Kyle Conder and the staff that we have in compliance have all been working very hard with NCAA and with institutional officials to make sure that not only do we discover what is going on in this situation, but also, again, to improve our program as it goes forward. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Rick for a few comments, and then we'll take your questions, as Brad Cheeves noted.
Good afternoon. This is almost the end, I suppose, of a long process, and a process that as an athletics director, you don't anticipate going through. I was drawn to SMU for a number of reasons when I came here in 2012. And chief among those reasons were the institutional values, and in particular the values of President Turner. And so it's a sad day for many reasons. One, that our athletics program has brought negative attention to our outstanding university. And we're embarrassed by that. But as President Turner alluded, the thing that bothers me the most, and the thing that's been most difficult today, as we learned of the Committee on Infractions decision, was meeting with our student athletes and the young men who are impacted by the decision of individuals to act against our standards and our values, and now are being penalized because of that. And so for me, my attention today in large part has been, again, on those young men and on things we might do or consider to help them move forward and to mitigate the impact on our men's basketball and men's golf student athletes.
Okay, with that, we'll be glad to take some questions.
Brad?
Yes, Brad Towns from the Dallas Morning News. I noted in your news release that the university disagrees with the conclusion of the committee that Coach Brown failed to promote an atmosphere of compliance. Should I take that to mean that you have Coach Brown has your full support going forward?
Well, Coach Brown has my full support going forward. Obviously, you can see from some of the things in the report, there are adjustments that we are going to have to make. There are adjustments we've made, and he's very much involved with those too. And so we intend for him to be our basketball coach in the future.
Next.
Rick, can you characterize the conversations and the reaction from the athletes when you talk to them?
Yeah, it was very emotional, understandably unexpected, unfair. I think they, reacted very strongly to having an opportunity taken from them that they deem very special, and that they work hard to earn the right to participate in. And so this morning it was about making sure they know we care about them, making sure they understand that while they didn't play a role in this, and while we're all going to have to deal with some adversity that's resulting from, again, these decisions of others, that we were going to support them, and we asked them just to work with us and to try to demonstrate some patience as it relates to any decisions they may or may not make in the coming days until we could all process this and then get together again to discuss it further.
If you would, just identify yourself and your outlet.
Jack Fink, CBS 11 News. I wanted to ask, what is going to be the determining factor on whether you appeal this decision as far as the student athletes are concerned? You said this is really unfair, so why would there be any deliberation?
Well, the implication for appealing, it takes about 3 months to get the hearing set up. It can take anywhere from 3 to 4, even there have been instances 5 months. It takes about a month to get a decision out of it. During that period of time, you have signing dates for early signing dates in November. You may very well go into a signing date in February. So the implications of that on recruiting. We also want to understand completely what the implication is if we appeal something. Is it continued going forward? Once the decision's made, does it still, if you don't win the appeal, does it still apply to that year? We don't want it carrying on to another year. We have literally been trying to get through this, like you probably have, over the last few hours, and so we've got to find the answer to those questions on the appeal. Now, relative to some of the others, I think there's a clear basis for appeal, and that is it's a practice of the NCAA that if a student athlete is in a sport that you have team and individual performance, that it applies to both. In golf, that's even more unfair than the whole team. It's for the individuals not to be able to compete. And we have, obviously, a very good golfer that's a senior that would want to repeat. There's an issue about forfeiting games that supposedly that we had a player that was not eligible. That was never brought up to us during the whole time of this 18 months of this investigation. We learned about that when we got to the hearing. And so we don't believe, we need to investigate that more clearly because that particular violation occurred before he was a student athlete here. He was also, as a part of this, given exemption from any kind of violation reported to him, and the NCAA believes that's going forward. I think we understood it to be period. So there are a couple of things that we know we're going to consider very seriously of appealing. And then the general end of the season, we simply have a few questions to answer before we decide. We have 15 days to decide, and we will. It's not as simple as it sounds like it would be.
Like Leslie, Channel 8, in your assessment of the facts, did Larry Brown lie to the NCAA?
To me,
Yes.
I think in the first instance, he did, but in that same meeting, he said, wait a minute. And then he told how it occurred. And so I think in sort of the pressure of the moment, he probably reported how he wished it were, but he corrected it. And so in the same meeting. And so as a result, I think if it had any impact, it was very short-lived.
Bill Nichols, Dallas Morning News. Rick, can you just assess what the NCAA may have said during the meeting, and if they gave you some comparable ideas as to, studies as to other cases that they were going to weigh in terms of penalty?
Well, there wasn't really anything Bill said in the hearing that would have helped us to assess the potential penalties that we would be subject to. I mean, as you all do, you know the new guidelines, and we know those guidelines as well. But my understanding is in the universe of one right now. There is no case precedent, I don't believe, under this new penalty guideline. And so we don't have that context to try to evaluate, our penalties versus maybe some others. I think my disappointment, again, comes from, I believe the structure provides an opportunity to hold individuals accountable if individuals participated in and committed violations. And by and large, I think that occurred, and it reflected its ability to do that. But what I have trouble with is how that correlates to having student athletes who were not involved in any of the violations be held accountable for that.
And isn't that one of the reasons you can appeal a case, simply to say that you think that it is unfair?
I suppose there's several reasons we can appeal, and as President Turner said, we're exploring those. What we've got to determine is, does an appeal, and there are different circumstances, as you know, the golf season is in the spring and the basketball season's in the winter, for example. So, the timeline is going to be more impactful on basketball, perhaps, than it would on golf. And so we've got to determine whether or not an appeal has unintended consequences of further penalizing our program, and make sure that we don't do something that would increase, again, the exposure for our student athletes.
Yes.
Guy Rawlings from CBS 11. Weren't there self-sanctions involved with this prior to the ruling? And does the NCAA indicate why they aren't sufficient? And also, are the rules fair across the board?
So there were self-imposed sanctions. The NCAA recognized in men's basketball the sanctions and applied them towards their recommended sanctions. And so, for instance, in men's basketball, we reduced scholarships by 2 for 2015-16, and they deducted those 2 scholarships from their penalty of 9 over 3 years, as an example. They were a little uncertain about men's golf in that they didn't seem to indicate the same application. We're hopeful that's an oversight, and we're, again, trying to gather information on that. And again, in terms of fairness, my point is this is all about the student athletes. And I'm just hopeful that we could develop a system and implement a system of enforcement that would hold the people involved accountable and not have innocent student athletes unnecessarily penalized for the actions of others.
Yes.
Stephen Hawkins with the AP. Chancellor Turner, as you talked about a minute ago, we know the new rules are in effect, and you talked about it being unfair. Do you think SMU was unfairly penalized based on past history and based on 10, I think this is 10 infractions committee?
Well, if you read the NCAA report, they make note of that. And so under this new structure, they are to list for each allegation for which they found, each outcome for which they find there should be a penalty, what the mitigating factors are and extenuating factors. And so that history is noted in that context. Now, I think they review each allegation on its own, but I do think that that's in the background. And so obviously we're not happy about that history, and particularly relative to the death penalty, but we're also an N of one here now, as Rick was saying. We're sort of the first one to go through this new system in which, given an allegation or given a finding, that once they determine the level of that finding, well then there are presumptive penalties, and there's a very narrow range of those presumptive penalties. And I think that we have come into part of that. I know that the implementation of this new system was to try to do exactly what Rick said, and that is to tie penalties to individuals who cause them, who are responsible for them. But this adding in the postseason ban part of it, I think you're going to find that's going to be very controversial as we go forward. I think in general, holding individuals responsible is going to be positively met, but I think this tying it too much to the student athletes also, I think is unfair and will be viewed that way. Unfortunately, we're at a point in which there are probably 6 or 7 others that will be coming out, and all of us will be a part of this will be the first phase of this new process, and unfortunately we're the first of that phase.
So following up on that, clearly there are individual penalties. Coach Brown is suspended. Several of the people mentioned in that are no longer employed by the university. What about the player involved? Is he still part of the university or no longer? The player.
Yeah, the player's in good standing, academically and otherwise, with the institution.
There was, at the time that he didn't play last spring, it was because of his grades in the fall. It had nothing to do with the NCAA, and I'd like all of you to get that correct. A few of you have, but most haven't. He didn't play in the spring because of his grades for the fall, not having anything to do with the NCAA. Yes?
Nick Chavanel, SMU TV. What would you have to say to fans and students who weren't involved in this whole process and are now shocked and confused at the findings from the NCAA?
Well, I think that they are with everyone else. We knew the outcome this morning at 8 o'clock when we got the report, and so we've been scrambling. The press got it at 10, so we had a 2-hour start, but as long as it is, it takes you about that long to read through it if you're not a speed reader, and I guarantee you can't speed read it. And so all of us are learning of it as we go. There have been indications of when we had hearings that this would be coming out, and so as a result, for example, we get a 24-hour notice that we're going to get it. So we learned yesterday morning that we were going to get it this morning. So it's simply the process, and all of us are responding to it as we go. Yes.
Patrick Engel, Scout.com. Are you displeased with the timeline, the timing that the NCAA took to give you a decision?
The procedure says that it's to take 8 to 12 weeks, which would have been the middle of August to the middle of September. Obviously, we were hoping we wouldn't get it last week during our centennial celebration. That would have been a real downer. It's not real good this week. It wouldn't be good any week, but particularly at that time. So they took at least 2 to 3 weeks longer. We have assumed it's because they were simply trying to scale our situation to the ones that are coming forward. We know that there were half a dozen or so hearings this summer in addition to our hearing. And so all of those are going to be more than likely under the new system unless they go back many, many years. And so as a result, we assumed that that was sort of holding us up. So the period of time it took to receive the report is not excessive by the standards sometimes that you get. Yes?
How long is the appellate process? Now, would that allow basketball and sport and golf to resume business as usual through their entire season?
It's unclear, and by that I just simply mean there is no defined period of time for the appeal process. And that's one of the things that we're trying to learn more about for reasons we cited earlier as it relates to having some clarity about if the penalty would if we would know for certain whether or not the penalty was to be applied this season, or if there was a possibility of the penalty bleeding into a future year, or extending the uncertainty and the instability surrounding the program.
It can take we have to submit something, then they have to respond to it, and we have to respond to what they submit. So I think the whole process can take anywhere from 3 to 4 months just to get to your hearing. And so then how long they want to take on a hearing, it was 12 weeks this time. How long would it be, or 10 weeks? How long would it be next time? And so that's the unknown. But again, what I just told you, we've got to make sure is the case, because again, we've been trying to understand it, not exactly what step 2 will be.
Adam Grossbard, Rebels.com. In light of the ruling, is there a chance that student athletes will be allowed to transfer to other programs?
So another thing that we're working with our student athletes on as it relates to, as I mentioned earlier, we asked them just to help get through this most, I guess, severe emotional part of the process that we'll encounter. And then let's talk again. If a student athlete, though, and this would be the case, whether we were facing a postseason ban or not, if a student athlete determines that it's in their best interest and there's an opportunity elsewhere that will allow them to have the type of experience that they deserve to have, then we'll certainly work with them on that.
You guys have discussed the past transgressions and how that's maybe affected this current sanction. What is it about the culture on this campus? Is there something that you can point to that maybe comes back to why this has happened so many times? There have been 10 infractions over the course of whatever it is, 45 years. Why is it that these types of things continue to happen on this particular campus?
Well, I can't talk about the first 7 or so of those, or 8, but the 2011 we turned in because we had a coach that misunderstood the texting rules relative to parents, and so we turned that in. So here's one instance of the last 2 that we initiated. The follow-up on that is literally what led to what we have now, because and there were some questions about that were in the local newspaper. But nevertheless, we work very hard to say that here are the rules, we educate the coaches on them, and in the instances, in this case, people acknowledged that they knew what the rule was and simply wanted to win so badly that they decided to take a chance. We have communicated over and over that at SMU, whenever we hire a coach or anybody, that at SMU, given that history, we don't have any tolerance. A major infraction in those situations in which you decide to do something, you're going to be terminated. And so having a strong compliance program and then following it up when somebody decides not to live by it are the major 2 things that we do follow. I think that approach has probably changed in the last couple of decades, but we really do work hard at compliance.
Is that why, according to the NCAA's fuller length report, it says that when Coach Brown was initially hired, because there was such a span between his college tenures, there was somebody the compliance director was put in, basically in his office in the same building?
Yeah. And then Rick can respond to that. But if you think of what's occurred in NCAA rule change, all of the rules on academic preparation, on courses in high school, everything has changed in the last 25 years. And it's hard for every one of us to keep up with the rules on an annual basis. And so if you've missed 25 years, you can't cram for that. It takes a number of experiences over time to have the opportunity for you to learn. And so given that situation, Rick and I conversed about it, and then he made the decision to have Kyle Condor be a part of the program.
I think to the culture question, I've got a couple thoughts on it. First of all, I was pleased that through this process, it was acknowledged that we have strong and robust compliance systems, and I do believe it was reinforced that we have a culture of compliance and that people do understand our standards, and we do a good job of educating them about the rules. But the second thing I would say is, you have to contextualize, as President Turner just did with the last couple violations, exactly when did those occur and what types of violations were they, rather than just, broad brush it with X violations over X time. And then lastly, I would say, and I'm proud of this, is that, I'm proud of it because I know not everyone takes this approach, but it's the right approach, is that if we believe a violation has occurred, or we learn that a violation may have occurred, then we pursue that to its end, regardless of what the outcome of that is. And I'm not sure that happens all the time. And sometimes when you do that, that means you run the risk of discovering and dealing with more violations than perhaps you would if you didn't do that.
And we have an external person that works with us on that, because the idea is that we want to know, without any questions of credibility, what does go on, and that we've told them, there's no limits. We want to know what's going on, and that you have full authority to do whatever investigation you need to do. And that all reports of violations go to Paul Ward, the general counsel for the university. And so that immediately then clicks in a process to make sure that we fully investigate whatever there is. There's no effort to lowball it, mitigate it, or whatever else. Our idea is to try to find out what the facts are.
During the course of the investigation, in your conversations with the NCAA and then in conversations that may go into a potential appeal, was there any mention of penalties imposed on other institutions around the country?
You really don't get that opportunity. And besides that, we knew that our case is the first under a different system. And so you can look back at some of those recent ones and say, well, good grief, for 6 years or 7 years something occurred, and here we have one instance. And I do want to underscore that with all the things that occur about academic issues. This was one instance. It had nothing to do with credit at SMU. It had nothing to do with SMU faculty. It had nothing to do really with any process of SMU. And so as a result, you just can't, you go crazy doing that, because it's like one standard, and then you say, okay, that's over with, and now we're starting a new one. And when you're on the borderline like we are, it seems terribly unfair in some regards. So you have to kind of look at what the standards are here. And going forward, we assume that everything's going to be consistent with our situation under these new guidelines until such time as those of us in the NCAA can work on it to try to get a decrease in the impact on students. I mean, these rules were supposed to make the person guilty responsible for what they have done. And there was never a discussion to make it harder on students. And so that's going to need to be changed.
Justin Bredos, KERA News. Have you guys had a chance to have a meeting with Coach Brown today? And if so, how did that meeting go?
Yeah, so again, a little bit about the day. In the morning, as President Turner said, we got the report at 8 o'clock. As quickly as I could, just tried to digest really what the penalties were. And then as soon as I could, made my way to basketball and golf in that order. And first spent time with Coach Brown. His reaction was, probably not a surprise. He was very concerned about the penalty that impacted the team, really, and that's what our conversation focused around. And then there was another issue that President Turner alluded to as it related to the eligibility of a student that was a little bit of a surprise to us. So those were the issues we discussed. That was our focal point. We met with the team, as I mentioned. He did a great job, as good as you can under those circumstances. But that was very tough and emotional, and then we did the same thing with golf. And so that's really where the focus has been. And then President Turner had a conversation with Coach Brown as well later in the day.
Let's go one more question. Anybody?
Can you discuss what you and Coach Brown talked about then, if you had a discussion with Coach Brown?
Me?
Yes.
Just having reviewed everything, and that, again, expressing our concern like his was about the effect on the student athletes, and that we would obviously be evaluating with him in the coming days too issues of appealing. the postseason ban, and also the other issues that I mentioned. There are 2 for basketball, 2 for golf, postseason ban being 1 of each. And so, again, just assuring him that we would be looking at that relative to the student activities, and that we needed to handle this as well as we can and go forward and be future-oriented, not past-oriented.
You know,
And he agrees.
the last thing I'll add is, having gone through the hearing for the first time in June, several of us commented coming out of that we felt if you were to allow current coaches not involved in an NCAA process to view or be present at that hearing, what a profound impact that could have on rules ed and on deterring some of the activity that takes place. I would also suggest that I think if members of the NCAA enforcement staff and/or Committee on Infractions were to join me in the locker rooms as I talked to the men's basketball and men's golf student athletes this morning, that they too may have a better appreciation for the impact that decision has on young men and students who aren't involved in these violations.